Pack a picnic, play some sports. Use the weight rooms and the courts. Travel with us, see some sights. Learn about old airplane flights. Socialize and meet new folks. Share some laughter and some jokes. Throw a frisbee, row a boat. Learn to read a music note. Use the trails to take a hike. Walk or jog or ride your bike. Learn to use computers well. Make some crafts that you can sell. Draw or paint, create stained glass. Hit a ball or catch a pass. Take a hayride, learn ballet. See a concert or a play. Join a league, play on a team. Walk along a balance beam. Listen to a string quartet. Learn to train your household pet. Tour a fine historic site. Make your own creative kite. Exercise so you'll stay fit. Learn to sew or learn to knit. Play the keyboard or guitar. Play a round of golf or par. We're your guide for things to do. There is something just for you. Something for everyone.
Let's talk about dying. Everybody's got to do it, but nobody wants to talk about it. So talking about organ donation is even harder, especially with your family. Because to talk about that, you got to admit you're going to die. And that's hard. Maybe people think if they don't talk about it, it won't happen. You know what? That's exactly what happens with organ donation. If you don't talk to your family about it, it won't happen. Yeah, it's kind of creepy, maybe weird, but you get to give the biggest gift in the whole world, life. So this is what I think. Organ donation is not about dying. It's about living. Talk to your family about living. Talk to your family about donating life.
Welcome to the Coffee House, where in the next hour, two views on where globalization is taking us. Robert Shar from the International Monetary Fund and Thea Lee of the AFL-CIO. Also, Pulitzer-prize winner Clarence Page returns to talk about his new video essay, Charter Schools That Work. And New York Times reporter Stephen Holmes drops by to chat about his biography of Democratic kingpin Ron Brown. Plus, jewelry from the Middle East and what it says about the lives of women. Poetry by DJ Renegade and Miriam Morsel Nathan. Phil Wiggins has got the blues, and we unveil the memorial to Roscoe the Rooster.
Hi, and welcome to the forum at the Coffee House. Globalization. It's here, and there's no turning back. But where is globalization taking us? A rising tide that lifts all boats, the poor as well as the rich? A world where corporations set all the rules and drive down wages, health and safety, and environmental standards? Are average citizens powerless to affect its course? Clearly, the protesters who recently filled the streets of Washington, Seattle, Prague, and elsewhere didn't think so. They were intent on redirecting, in some cases dismantling, the institutions that govern global trade and development. The World Trade Organization, World Bank, and International Monetary Fund chant the mantra of free trade, that the path to global growth and harmony is by removing all barriers to commerce. But to the protesters and many others, free trade threatens a race to the bottom. A tired, needlessly polarized argument? Well, how do we ensure that the economic pie is big enough so that each of us has a decent share? And how do we do that without destroying the planet in the process? We're going to put these questions to Robert Shar, until recently Chief of the Trade Policy Division at the International Monetary Fund, and Thea Lee, Assistant Director for International Economics and Public Policy in the Public Policy Department at the AFL-CIO. Welcome both of you to the Coffee House.
Thank you.
Last year, now it might have been a battlefield conversion, but President Clinton, when he was in Seattle for the World Economic Summit there, and in the face of thousands and thousands of protesters, said that he would support the inclusion of enforceable labor rights in the World Trade Organization. Now, it's been said that social change always begins with hypocrisy, and Bill Clinton has been an ardent free trader. But if that were to happen, would that be a good thing? I assume that you, Thea Lee, think it would be.
Well, absolutely. Workers' rights and environmental protections have been left out of most of the rules of the trading system, and the result has been that we have trade rules that privilege corporations and corporate concerns and take care of the profits of big corporations, but have done very little to protect workers' rights and environmental standards, even as corporate mobility and corporate power and corporate flexibility have grown. So we think it's a very important place to have a discussion. The World Trade Organization sets the rules for the global trading system, and we think workers' rights and environmental standards ought to be on that agenda, and we welcome President Clinton saying so.
What do you think, Robert?
I'd be very cautious in this area. I think I do agree with Thea that good labor standards are very important. There is an international code of labor conduct through the International Labor Organization, which many countries have endorsed. It's not being well enforced. I think that it should be enforced, and that's the forum for it. Trade rules can only address so many problems. You can't use trade rules to address trade, environment, labor, poverty, and too many things. You'll overburden them. The system won't work. It'll get seized by strong private interests.
What's wrong with that approach, to use the ILO forum as the vehicle for solving labor problems?
Well, the International Labor Organization is a tremendously important and credible organization that is a tripartite structure of governments, employers, and unions. It sets labor standards. It identifies the core workers' rights that all countries will agree to uphold. Freedom of association, the right to organize, and prohibitions on child labor, forced labor, and discrimination. The problem is that the ILO has no enforcement powers and is not likely to. That the real economic clout in the world global system is in the trading system, as well as in the international financial institutions. And if we can't talk about protecting labor standards and environmental protections in the organizations that have the economic clout, then it's not all that meaningful. We can't simply leave workers' rights in the organizations with no power and keep all the corporate concerns in the organizations which actually can impose economic consequences on corporations and on governments.
I would question the fact that the international organizations, either the IFIs or elsewhere, are designed to address corporate interests. I don't believe they are, and I believe that the staff and the management of all these institutions would not like that idea at all. That's not how we see ourselves set up to do. Again, I would think that strengthening the ILO, so if these concerns really are widely felt, I don't see why they can't be addressed through there. Again, I think that in practice, there's a real danger when you overload the trade system with all these extra concerns.
The ILO recently came out with a study, and that study was about the effects, in part, of globalization on the mental condition of workers in a number of countries, Finland, Germany, the United States among them. What it found was that, in part due to globalization, there was a growing number of workers facing depression and especially stress on the job, apparently in relation to the fact that people feel as though they're competing against the whole world now, and that every day they have to get out there and really hit a home run in order to survive economically. What can be done in the context of a globalizing economy? Because it's going to continue that way regardless of what the trade rules are. That's where things are heading. What can be done to make life better and easier and less stressful for people in the workplace?
Well, I think the idea is that you need to change the dynamics of global competition, and this goes right back to the heart of the trading system. I don't think it's a question of overloading the trading system with non-trade issues. It's a question of what are the rules of global competition? What are acceptable ways of competing in the global economy? And if you have no rules at all for workers' rights, essentially what you're saying to corporations and to countries is anything goes. You can hire kids as young as 5 or 2 or 3, it doesn't really matter. There's not going to be any limit on child labor. You can use slave labor, and if you don't want unions, you can repress them by firing workers, jailing workers, torturing workers, or even murdering workers who are trying to form an independent trade union. And what we're saying,
and those aren't unfair trade practices.
Those are not considered unfair trade practices. Those are considered acceptable ways of competing in the global economy. And the same thing with the environment, that you can trash your environment.
You're not saying that those are benign conduct in the eyes of trade. You're just saying that these are not cognizable under the rules of trade. That is, that if a country engages in these practices, another country can't say, well, we're not going to trade with you on that account.
That's exactly right. And the World Trade Organization, in fact, prevents countries from taking a trade action on the basis of violation of workers' rights. That it would be a violation of world trade rules to say, for example, that the United States wanted to cut off trade with Burma, a country which uses slave labor, where the government explicitly uses forced and slave labor, where workers work in apparel companies producing goods for the American market, in apparel companies at 4 cents an hour, companies owned by military dictators, essentially. And so, but if we wanted to take a trade action against Burma, that would violate the rules of the World Trade Organization, or some people would argue that it would do that. And so the absence of rules protecting some minimum standards, the ILO core workers' rights, as you said, in fact gives the wrong message. And I think what it does is it puts governments in an impossible situation where, in order to compete for foreign investment, to compete for a share of world markets, they are inevitably pitted next to each other in the so-called race to the bottom, where the idea is that if your neighbor is firing and jailing and murdering trade unionists, and you want to attract the same investors, you come under some pressure to also repress workers' rights as a way of gaining competitive advantage. And we think that if you took that out of competition, that would be something that would change the dynamic of global competition in a way that would be good for workers and good for the global economy.
Well, it seems to me that there is a certain burden on...
I need to respond on that just a little bit.
I would like you to, actually.
If I was only going to say that, I mean, I absolutely share your concerns about Burma. Firstly, I think you're ascribing more to the global trade rules than happened. They haven't stopped the United States putting trade sanctions on Cuba or anywhere else. Secondly, and I think what's more fundamental here, I'm not going to defend any of these practices, I don't think it was really quite right, but all current research shows that you don't get ahead with that. You know, the fact that Burma is pursuing the policies you say is not encouraging other people to pursue the same policies. If it was true, you'd find the Burmese economy flourishing if you could make benefits by having slave labor camps. In fact, it's not. Burma is the poorest country in the world, I think, now. It's had the worst economic performance of any country in the world over the last 25 years. I mean, it's an impoverished slave state.
What about the Chinese economy?
It's not, I mean, it's not true that these factors lead people to go to pursue those kind of policies. I would say that the current research that we're seeing shows that countries that treat their workers well, that pursue good policies towards labor, do better. You know, you can't succeed in the globalized economy with an impoverished, ill-treated labor force.
Well, what about
labor
that?
rights are very important, and it's to succeed in the global economy.
We believe that also. We believe that it's good for the economy, it's good for developing economies to respect core workers' rights and to respect the environment, to respect human rights. The question is, when countries find themselves in a competitive struggle with other countries, like the Chinese economy, for example, where independent trade unions are outlawed. According to the State Department's annual human rights report, there is not an independent trade union operating in China. And yet that has been a very successful economy. The Indonesian economy under Suharto was very successful in the global economy, as was Mexico, during a time when there was repression of independent trade unions. And so the question is, some countries certainly do get ahead in the global economy through repression. And what are the steps that we can take through the trading system to take away that competitive advantage and to reward the countries that are doing the right thing by their workers, that are nurturing independent trade unions, that are respecting the environment, that have good, strong democracies and respect human rights?
If it were possible to, as Robert is suggesting, affect this through the ILO enforcement, to give ILO, invest ILO with enforcement authority, would that be a satisfactory approach as far as you're concerned?
Well, if the ILO had the economic power to change trade relationships and so on, that would certainly be something worth looking at. And we also think that if this issue ever goes further in the international trading system, the ILO will play a key role, that the ILO ought to have a role in monitoring workers' rights, because it is the organization with the experience and the objective credibility to do that.
A lot of the concern of people at IMF, and tell me if I'm wrong here, is that the position of AFL-CIO and labor groups generally is, especially in the developed world, is, well, if you, these efforts to restrict capital movements are really an effort to ensure that we, the wealthy workers of the West, still have our jobs while there's no money for development throughout the world. How do you respond to that?
Well, it's a fair question, and the answer is that our belief is that we are protecting our own interests by working to protect the rights of workers in other countries, because we believe we can't build the kind of labor movement we want and have the kind of labor rules we want in this country unless workers in other countries can exercise their own rights to raise their voice at their workplace, to form unions if they choose to do so, to have a strong political voice. So it's very intertwined in the sense that the international workers' rights issue is about the self-interest of American workers, but it's also about development. And that we also believe that the kind of global economy where workers' rights are respected will be an economy that's much better for American workers, where you have stronger middle class, strong democracies in developing countries. We can have trading partners that with whom we have a more reciprocal trade relationship.
We're going to cut you off because we're
Okay.
almost out of time, and I would give Robert a chance to
Okay.
respond, and then we're going to have to leave.
I think that the concerns that Thea is raising are good concerns. I think this is the wrong way to go about them. I think in practice, if you inserted labor rights into this, it's very interesting, I think, that the poor countries in the World Trade Organization are dead set against the inclusion of these rights, almost unanimously, because they fear, and I think the history of trading relations globally shows us this, that this insertion of rights will be misused by the big powers that actually have the dominant influence in these organizations to insert their own sanctions on whatever grounds they wish, a la the trade sanctions which you said were illegal but have been introduced against Cuba on the same grounds you said couldn't have been introduced against Burma, and
Not
this
on
has
workers'
been done
rights
with
grounds.
impunity.
I'm afraid that's going to have to be the last word.
Okay.
Many thanks to Thea Lee of the AFL-CIO and Robert Sharr of the International Monetary Fund. I don't think we've solved the globalization issue tonight, but perhaps we've made it a little bit easier for folks out there to partake in the dialogue. Still to come, Clarence Page on his video essay about charter schools, Stephen Holmes on his biography of Ron Brown, poetry by Miriam, Morsel, Nathan, and DJ Renegade, music by Phil Wiggins and Urban Legends, and Roscoe the Rooster is immortalized. But first, before there was one big global market, jewelry from the Middle East was a living herstory.
Imagine the dreams that these people had, the beauty, the creativity, the aesthetic that they put into these objects.
For us, maybe wedding now, it's something average, but for them, it's the dream of their life. So all what they dream in their life, in that night and in that garment.
Traditional jewelry and costumes of the Middle East are a living expression of their creators' dreams. We dream those dreams ourselves, confronted and seduced by their beauty and their timeless implications. They glitter and clink. They tempt and protect. Ethnic and indigenous arts transcend place and time. Traditional artists speak to something common to all of us. The old silk and incense trade roads linked the peoples of China, Central Asia, Turkey, Syria, Yemen, Egypt, North Africa. The jewelry and costumes of those ancient places and peoples link us to them.
Jewelry and costumes in the Middle East had many different functions. Jewelry brought beauty to people's lives. The people who lived 50 or 60 years ago had a harsh life. Life was brief, it was hard work, and it was tough. But imagine the dreams that these people had, the beauty, the creativity, the aesthetic that they put into these objects. It also brought value. The women who lived at that time had little security. There weren't banks, there weren't places to keep your treasure. If they were Bedouin women, they had to be able to move quickly. So their silver jewelry was value. It was sold by weight, and that put a monetary value on it. It was something they wore, so they carried it with them when they moved. And when they had a calamity or they had a quick need, they could sell the silver jewelry and it would be melted down and they would be able to deal with the emergency. So a woman, when she married, got new silver jewelry and it stayed with her for her lifetime unless she had a need. Women also looked to jewelry to talk about themselves. It would not only describe their status or where they were from or even what tribe they belonged to or what village. It attracted attention. Women in those days led restricted lives. They didn't socialize easily with men outside their own family. But they could put on jewelry and costumes and send a message and attract attention. The jewelry would clink and clatter and attract attention and send a message of seduction and interest. Also, life being hard in those days, and life was full of jeopardy and danger, women looked to jewelry for protection. There were symbols in it that protected against the evil eye, which everyone was afraid of. There were religious symbols in some of the art that reminded the women of their religion, of their dependence on God even. Women would put jewelry on their children to protect them. If a woman was nursing, she would wear a certain color stone to help her nurse. If a woman was newly married and she wanted to become pregnant, she would get a piece of jewelry that had a fertility symbol in it. So there will be pieces of silver that will show different expressions of protection or need or beauty or seduction.
In the house of the 1,000 candles, old women pray for the safe return of soldiers while eating little duck hearts sautéed in butter. Fig and almond orchards grow in the place where the sky and earth meet. When their prayers go unheeded, the old women wrap holy stones in white lace-trimmed handkerchiefs and place them inside the coffins of their dead men. Draped in black, they sit at heavy tables and eat yogurt with date honey. Oddly, there are pink roses in silver pitchers on the mantel. On days when their prayers are answered, the old women cover their shoulders with small white shawls and light 1,000 candles in the windows overlooking the sea. After dinner, they open crimson umbrellas and walk arm in arm in the black of night.
Hi, and welcome to a second look at the Coffee House. Our public education system is the best in the world, except when it's the worst. What do we do then? How do we keep our bargain with the kids who are losing out? Well, there are vouchers to private schools, as we heard about in the presidential debates. But how about a solution that keeps kids inside the public schools? The Pulitzer-prize winning columnist Clarence Page has a new documentary out called Charter Schools That Work.
A grassroots revolution in public education is sweeping across America. Here, for instance, in Newark, New Jersey, is the North Star Academy. This is a charter school, a public school run not by the local school district, but by parents and teachers.
Charter schools aren't about having another school. It's not about another pretty school. It's about another way to educate kids to a higher level.
Will there be qualified teachers in these schools? Will the program be a program which educates the children according to what the state's standards and curriculum frameworks are?
We closed a charter school in Chicago just over a year ago, and the media asked, well, what's wrong? There's something wrong with charter schools. One of them didn't work. We've got to get in there and find out what's wrong with charter schools.
Okay, we're back at the Coffee House. Welcome, Clarence.
Thank you. Glad to be here, Howard.
Let's start with the basics. Give me 3 or 4 key differences between a regular public school and a charter school.
Well, these are public schools, of course, right, but they bear close resemblance to private schools. Number one, instead of being part of a local school board that is chartered by the state, the school is chartered directly to the state. So each school is like its own school board in that sense, which gives it
high independence.
High independence, very high local autonomy. The key advantage to that is you cut through the bureaucracy. This is the main advantage of charter schools is that you don't have the bureaucracy and the really rigid requirements that states put on, mandated requirements of curriculum and class size and a schedule, etc. You're allowed to experiment. You're allowed to be an alternative school in a true sense and behave in many ways like a private school, even though you're publicly funded.
Do they tend to be neighborhood schools by and large, or do they draw from all over?
They tend to be magnets. You know, there's 1,700 across the country, I should say, overall, and this is a movement that started in 1992 with one school.
Very recently.
Very recent, and in some ways it was started as kind of a compromise between what we have now and vouchers, which is this radical idea at the other extreme. Teachers, as we all know, public school teachers to teachers unions are hotly opposed to vouchers, but teachers like charter schools. In fact, there are teachers here in Montgomery County who have been trying to organize charter schools, but the state here has not gone along with the idea yet.
And the attraction is, the attraction for the teachers?
For the teachers, the attraction is they get some more freedom from the bureaucratic rules and regulations and oversight that in many ways, of course, is supposed to be good, and in many ways, in more cases than not, is good. I should point out, with all of our criticism of our schools, 80% of American parents are satisfied with their public schools. Right. It's the schools that are not meeting expectations that are getting all the attention. And in many ways, charter schools are something that teachers have responded with, as well as community groups. The Urban League has opened up some charter schools. The YMCA has got a charter schools. It's a way of responding that can do something innovative without breaking away into something really radical.
Okay, but if are they actually drawing then the kids who are in that bottom 20%, as you say?
They tend to occur in communities where you have low-performing schools and single-parent households, low-income households, low participation by parents in the schools because they've been deliberately discouraged from participating.
And what's the success rate?
Success rate, well, you know, out of 1,700 schools across the country, there have been about 30 that have failed so far.
Which is
and a lot of folks, as that little clip showed, some folks say, that school failed. This whole program is terrible. Throw it out. So 30 out of 1,700, that's really pretty good.
Low failure rate, really.
And what happens, you know, well, right here in the District of Columbia, of course, we had 2 charter schools that had a lot of publicity, especially Marcus Garvey School, very controversial, where you had a principal who got into a fracas with a Washington Times reporter and all, and that school closed.
I remember that whole affair, but that's the failure there seemed to be more or less on her head rather than on the system itself.
In a nutshell, some folks say it was programmed to fail. I mean, the school was chartered in a hurry, and some folks say there were just safeguards that weren't put in. There was another school that failed for fiscal reasons. They just couldn't keep the books balanced. But there's 33 schools, charter schools in Washington, D.C. that are succeeding so far. So the success rate has been quite good. And what's really encouraging about this, Howard, is to go out and to talk to students who were in regular public schools and they were literally failing, and now these students are thriving. You know, the anecdotes are just wonderful.
No, I remember one in the documentary where, I guess it's California, where the percentiles were at 30% in math and reading, now up to 60.
Up to 60, which is a big improvement and shows they're on the right track.
But what accounts for that? I mean, is it just personal attention? Good teachers all of a sudden being drawn to these schools? How does that happen?
The answer is yes.
Okay.
Everything, you name it, and there's reasons for the improvement. Part of it is just the fact that there's change. You know, what they call the Westinghouse effect that happened at a Westinghouse plant, where they were experimenting with new changes and worker productivity went up, and it turned out that just the fact that the workers were getting attention caused productivity to go up. In many ways, our kids are really yearning to have an opportunity to succeed, and when there are some changes, when the system gets shaken up, some kids improve just almost automatically because the shackles have been taken off. They get some smaller classroom sizes, they get some flexible hours. Even if they got to go to school more hours and for more months out of the year, they don't mind. And parents are turning out in great numbers for parent-teacher meetings.
That's what surprises me, or amazes me, really, that you have parents at other schools who you've got to drag them, bribe them to come out to a meeting, and here at the charter schools, it's huge attendance rates.
What we find is, in many cases, of course, you've got low-income parents who may be working 2 jobs and can't come to meetings, but a lot of other cases, the parents just haven't been encouraged to come out and get involved. And when it is a charter school, and everybody knows this is autonomous, and so it's make or break. If we don't make this school work, it's going to fail. That alone can lure a lot of people out because they feel needed and they feel involved, whereas they may not feel involved with the conventional public school.
So, do parents actually have a higher sense of ownership? I mean, not even a sense of ownership, but do they actually own this school in a way that they don't own other schools? They go in and can they help set the curriculum and so forth?
That's certainly what we found. I mean, that's what people told us as we were going around to schools. We went to up to Newark, out to Los Angeles, up to Chicago, down to Houston, KIPP Academy, which was spotlighted, by the way, at the Republican convention. You know, George W. Bush is real proud of KIPP Academy. You would think he started it, you know, but it certainly did start under his watch down there, and that's another school where the productivity has just gone way up. Readership, parental involvement has all improved greatly. All the charter schools don't have the same level of improvement, but overall most of them do. And I think what's really important here is that we not be afraid to try something new if what we now have is not working for some kids.
So why isn't Maryland one of the 33 states that's willing to try them?
As near as I can tell, Howard, my editorial opinion, and I get paid for it because I am a pundit, I think it's politics, and I think it's also psychology, and part of it is pride. You know, take Montgomery County, for example. For many years, Montgomery County's been known as having some of the best schools, not just in this area, but in the country. And now people are coming along and saying, we know they could be better, or we have some areas of the county that are underserved, or we have certain minority kids who aren't performing as well as white kids are, or English English-speaking kids are, whatever, you know. Sometimes it's kind of hard to admit that you're not doing as great of a job for everybody as you could be. Yeah. So what has happened is, it's a long, complicated story, but essentially, you've got local people here who have tried to get a couple of charter schools going in the county, and the school board has responded in spirit, but not really in action. And so you've had some back and forth between the county and the state board over this, but the legislature has not acted. You haven't had that kind of a statewide action. I suspect, Howard, actually, we'll probably see charter schools in Baltimore before we see them here, simply because Baltimore has greater need. You know, you've got those low-income areas, poor-performing schools, but you know, Baltimore embarked on a different track a few years ago. They went toward privatization of their schools.
That's right, which
and so, you know,
didn't work nearly as well.
You kind of got to do one experiment at a time. So I don't think they're going to have charter schools just yet.
But there is some action, you say. It's some
well,
local
D.C.,
action.
of course,
right.
We see a lot because the Republican Congress was very pro-charter, and many D.C. parents were very pro-charter. They were pro-anything, any kind of alternative. Virginia, their state government does allow charters, but they only have 2 charter schools in the whole state so far, neither of them in the Washington metro area, one around Roanoke and one near Richmond.
Well, one of the things that struck me that you said, failure is bad, but worse than failure is the fear of trying.
Fear of trying anything at all. And this is what educators are so frustrated by across the country, that, as I say, 80% of our public school parents are perfectly satisfied with their schools, but we still got 1 out of 5 that are not being well served. And what do we do for them? And it can be so hard to move a big, colossal Queen Mary of a school system in a flexible kind of way. And that's where charter schools enable you to break off a piece of this big cruise ship and make some little speedboats.
And none of this is budget busting either. I mean, it's all being handled within the current budget system. Pretty much.
It is, and that in itself has been problematic for some schools, because in order to get permission to start a charter, the school board may say, well, you know, what are you going to do for us? And well, we can do it for less money. You know, it gets this back and forth, and so sometimes that can put more pressure on the school to succeed fiscally, and they turn to outside sponsorship more often for support. But very often, you know, outside corporations and all can look quite favorably upon helping a school that is struggling but is doing something innovative.
Absolutely.
So it really kind of helps the whole community to get more involved.
It's the American way.
That's right.
Thank you to Clarence Page. No one believes it will be easy, but nobody believes that charter schools will solve everything. But giving up isn't the answer either. I'm Howard Cohen. This has been A Second Look.
But the chicken we're dedicating today was one that unfortunately crossed the road one too many times. He was our dear friend Roscoe. May he roost in peace.
To me, the whole reason for doing Roscoe was because, you know, his spirit. The fact that he was a vagabond rooster living here in Takoma Park for 10 years, you know, without being run over or eaten or anything like that. It was just amazing to me.
I remember especially a few years ago that some people were trying to put a bounty out on Roscoe, and some people, I believe, hid him until the coast was clear, and it really makes me feel happy that he is now permanently installed in the center of town.
For years, when Roscoe was among us, my husband and I would enjoy seeing him strut up and down Carroll Avenue during our morning walks. His mere presence here in Old Town brought joy and brightened our days. When Roscoe was taken from us, we wished to retain that joy for all of us. And that was the motivation for the Roscoe Memorial. Now, it is our hope that Roscoe in bronze will continue to bring to you the joy that our feathered friend brought to so many of us. Thank you.
So I thought of Roscoe. I thought about this rooster that wanders around from yard to yard, and people feed him and take care of him, and he became part of the community spirit here at Takoma Park. So I put this verse in. I decided to change the words a little bit. So we'll save the old red rooster when she comes. We'll save the old red rooster when she comes. We'll save the old red rooster. Guess we won't have chicken and dumplings when she comes, just dumplings. We won't have chicken and dumplings when she comes, just dumplings. We won't have chicken and dumplings. We won't have chicken and dumplings. We won't have chicken and dumplings when she comes, just dumplings. We'll save the old red rooster when she comes. We'll save the old red rooster when she comes. We'll save the old red rooster. We'll save the old red rooster. We'll save the old red rooster when she comes. Thank you very much.
One, acknowledgement. He awakens in a room dark as the inside of an egg, his heavy-veined hands searching for the light. Outside his window, sparrows sing to the rhythm of crickets. Yellow fingers crack the sky's black shell. He observes in awe as the sun's yoke bursts across the horizon and bird chirps spill over his windowsill. He assembles his sax, prepares to practice. Once, he loved the sharp notes a needle played in his veins. Now his smoke-stung lungs seek to inspire a higher key. 2, resolution. If he turns his sax upside down, it curves like a question mark. What is the true measure of music? Notes vibrate at various frequencies. Some make one smile as if you'd received a compliment. Others cry as if you cut open your finger. One melody brings back your grandmother dozing in her favorite chair. Another, a childhood friend splashing in a muddy puddle. But which sustained chord will fill a beggar's cup with coins? Which major scale can halt an army of malignant cells? Which low note will rumble from thunderclouds? Every sunrise finds him searching for the solo to answer his questions. 3, pursuance. He grips the mouthpiece between his teeth, closes his eyes and tongues the reed, pursuing a riff as soothing as sun rays on his naked back. His sax reflects sound, collating chords into colors. The first B-flat floats like smoke from a locomotive, riding the silver rails of scales, past the signs of time signatures, around the sharp curves of a treble clef, down through a valley of verses, over an intricate bridge, seeking a riff elaborate as a lattice of lace, infinite as the list of all integers, a solo electric, a solo elusive, a solo psalmic, a solo supreme. 4, song. His fingertips trek across the brass tracks of his tenor sax. Riding 3 rails as one, he clucks his tongue, flicking sweat from the sweet neck of sound. As he solos, the sun covers him in a plush robe of light until he finds this riff, shining bright as the name of the Lord on the lips of a kneeling child.
The game of politics can be like a game of chess. Strategy, manipulation, and nerve are at its core. Aggression and restraint, patience and deliberation, bold moves by bold players. No one understood this better than former Secretary of Commerce Ron Brown. By the time of his death in 1996, he had been involved in politics for over 30 years. His clients included President Bill Clinton, Baby Doc Duvalier, and countless others. He was a deal maker as well as a standard bearer, having been the first African-American chairman of the Democratic National Committee. His allegiances and his connections made him a complicated player. Writer Stephen A. Holmes tells this story in his biography, Ron Brown, An Uncommon Life. Stephen Holmes is the chief race relations reporter for the New York Times. He was also a reporter for Time magazine. He lives with his family in Washington, D.C. Welcome to the Coffee House.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for having me.
What brought you to write this book about Ron Brown initially?
Well, there were two things, actually. At the time of his death, I wrote an article for the Times. It was kind of an interpretive piece that asked a lot of questions rather than provided many answers. I asked, how should one view Ron Brown's life? I mean, what would you look at? When you looked at him, what would you see? Should you see just an African-American pioneer, a deal maker, a politician, a rogue? He was all of those things. Mm-hmm. So that was one of the things that came into my mind at the time. Also, I was very intrigued by the outpouring of emotion at the time of his death, and kept thinking, this is just the Commerce Secretary. I mean, if you think about it in the grand scheme of things, and of those federal offices that really are powerful offices, Commerce Secretary really isn't one of them. Right. And yet he was being treated as if he was a head of state. And I thought there's something interesting going on here. So I decided to explore what it was.
And what was interesting was that he had something Alexis Herman called The View. He had access to, would you talk about The View?
The View. Well, Alexis Herman, his good friend, who's now Secretary of Labor, talked about The View during the 1980 Kennedy campaign, when Ted Kennedy challenged Jimmy Carter for the Democratic nomination for president. And Ron Brown was the deputy chairman of that campaign and got to sit in on the high strategy meetings and got to see what Alexis Herman then called The View. The View was the wheeling and dealing that went on inside of a campaign, at the higher echelons of a campaign. It's a view that most African Americans never see, and certainly at that time, almost none had ever seen.
And it's the insider view.
It is the insider view. It's exactly what it is.
Being at the table, or anyway, being in the room, isn't that what
it's at least being in the room, and at this particular case, it was more, at that time it was being in the room. Later for Ron Brown, it was being at the table.
Would you talk a little bit about how he got to that table and what his...
Oh, there's a lot of things that got him to that table, including his upbringing. I go into fairly extensive detail of his childhood at the Teresa Hotel in Harlem.
That his father managed,
His father was the manager of the Hotel Teresa, which was a hotel in Harlem at the corner of 125th Street and 7th Avenue. And Ron Brown, the son of the hotel manager, grew up there in the 1940s and 1950s, a time when the segregation was fairly rampant, even in New York City. So what that meant was that if you were a black luminary, a famous person, an athlete, a musician, a politician, or visiting New York City, the only place you really could stay was the Hotel Teresa. So here was Ron Brown growing up in this milieu where he had all these marvelous role models, from Joe Louis, Ella Fitzgerald, Duke Ellington, Benjamin Mays, all these people who would stay at the hotel. But they were more than just role models. They were people who doted on him. He was this kind of very cute kid who hung around the hotel, and they treated him special. And I think if you're being treated special by Joe Louis, you've got to have a view of yourself as something pretty special. And I think that helped give him this enormous confidence, which was the basis of where he went and took his life from there. He just had this sense that he could do anything. And I think that's where that stemmed from.
Well, and he managed to, I mean, he went to work for the National Urban League. He played with running for mayor of Washington.
He did in 1978. He played very much, he was very seriously considering running for mayor. There were a number of people who came to him and thought that he would be a good candidate. Mainly, I think what a number of these people wanted to do was to forestall another potential candidate who they didn't want, whose name was Marion Barry.
And we all know what happened there.
And the rest is history.
So, but he also, I mean, he had so many lives, so many different periods. It was like, I mean, 9 lives is not enough.
Well, he did. I mean, there was his childhood at the Teresa, which I mentioned. There was also attending white schools and
the mother who passed.
He had a mother who passed for white, who
worked on Fifth Avenue.
Worked at Steuben Glass, a very exclusive retail store on Fifth Avenue, who would not let her son visit him, although by the time she was working there, the son was actually a grown man, but still would not let him visit him for fear
blow her cover
for fear she would lose her job. There was the infantry officer, the army officer. There was the official with the National Urban League. There was the lobbyist with Patton Boggs and Blow, a major lobbying firm here, who represented corporate corporations, international corporations and multinational corporations.
Would you talk about that? When he was a lawyer with Patton Boggs, he represented Baby Doc Duvalier.
He did.
Would you talk about how that came about?
Well, it came about because the ambassador here happened to see Ron Brown on TV one day and was impressed with him and decided this is the guy I needed to hire. Obviously, at the time, there was great unrest in Haiti, and there were some sanctions being instituted against the country. And so the Duvalier regime essentially needed a good front man here in Washington, and thought that Ron Brown, who had some, not only did he have charisma and some pull, but he also was a political figure. He was vice chairman of the Democratic National Committee at the time. And so the Duvalier family felt that Brown would help them plead their case here in Washington.
So fascinating to be a man that worked for the National Urban League and to also work.
It showed his ability to sort of compartmentalize things, that he would have been an official with the Urban League that was an organization that's dedicated to enhance the rights of the downtrodden, and yet at the same time representing a dictator and one of the most repressive regimes in the Western Hemisphere. And he actually saw, if he saw any contradiction, it didn't bother him. He just kept on going.
Well, and that was his gift in a way, wasn't it? I mean, that was why he became chairman of the DNC, because he understood the different factions of the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party, when it was at its most divided, maybe?
It certainly was at one of its most divided. I mean, if you remember at the time, the Democrats had lost 5 out of the last 6 elections at the time that he ran for the DNC chairmanship. And it was divided regionally, it was divided racially, it was divided politically and ideologically. There were just these fissures running all throughout the Democratic Party. And Brown really felt that he could be the unifying factor. He could be the one who would bring, for example, the Jesse Jackson faction in line, or with the Democratic Leadership Council faction, the conservative white faction of the party. And for the most part, he was able to do that.
And he was able to lay the groundwork for Bill Clinton's run.
Actually, I think one of the ways he was able to do that, he did it in many ways. One, he built up the organizational base of the party.
Right.
But one of the other things is that he was able to de-emphasize race. At the time, if you remember, there were a number of people who would say that the Democrats could never win the White House again because the party was much, much too identified with minorities, specifically black people. And what Ron Brown was able to do was to figure out how to de-emphasize race and put much more of the Democrats' emphasis on economics, and that this was the way to bridge the divide between all the different factions in the party, and also at the same time to appeal to a broader audience. And there were a number of people who worked with Brown at the DNC at the time, who later went on to become chief advisors to Clinton. And it's my contention, my belief, that Clinton's emphasis on the economy in the 1992 election stemmed in part from the groundwork that Brown had laid in this area.
Oh, wow, interesting. Well, and then Clinton made Brown Secretary of Commerce.
Right, which was not Brown's first choice.
Not what he wanted. He wanted to be Secretary of State. We just have a few minutes, but would you talk a little bit about the end of his life? And
well, as you know, Brown was under investigation for a number of financial improprieties. Towards the end, and he was very much desirous, as you mentioned, he wanted to be Secretary of State, and so he wanted to prove that he still had international experience and could help the Clinton administration internationally. So as a result, he insisted on a trade trip to Bosnia and Croatia, even though many people, a number of people within his own council, within the Commerce Department, said, don't do this, it's still a war zone, it's too dangerous. And essentially what happened during the trip was, and this plane crash came about primarily because the equipment at the airport, at Dubrovnik, had been wrecked and stolen by the invading Serbian army. So in fact, it was a war zone, and that was what cost him his life.
Wow. And you do talk about the controversy around that and some of the
conspiracy
theories.
I do. It's a curious thing, and built upon a mystery, a mysterious hole in the top of his head that's never really been adequately explained. But I look into it very carefully, looking at the forensic reports and interviewing people, and I come to a conclusion. But I won't tell you what it is. You have to read the book.
Okay. Well, I did read the book,
Okay.
and I did. It was a very satisfactory conclusion, actually. And just in the last seconds that we have, he was such a gallant man in so many ways. So his charisma, his charm, his brilliance in being able to see the larger picture. I mean,
Ron Brown had essentially a philosophy on life, and there was 3 things he felt you ought to do. He said you ought to do as much as you can for your client, whoever your client is, whether it's the Clinton administration or Baby Duvalier.
Right.
You should do what you can for your people. Generally, in his case, meant African Americans.
Right.
And the last thing is you should do what you can for yourself.
Right.
And his whole view of life was to try and meld those 3 impulses together.
And he did it.
And he did it well.
Thanks to the New York Times, Stephen Holmes, for joining me in the coffee house. Again, his new biography is called Ron Brown, An Uncommon Life. I'm Lisa Page, and this has been Writer's Block.
I like a man who is crazy about me, but I like a man who can live without me too. That's what I like about you. Well, I like a man who will lay down beside me. I like a man who can stand up to me too. That's what I like about you. Don't want a man to be my twin, under my thumb, under my skin. Don't want some guy like a shadow on the ground, nothing else to do but follow me around. I like a man who will cry on my shoulder, who don't mind if I cry sometimes too. That's what I like about you. That's what I like about Jamie. That's the reason we get along. Everything you do just right. You're tender in love, but you're tough in a fight. I like a man who can make it happen, who can keep me laughing when my whole world breaks in two. That's what I like about you. Crazy about me. I like a man who can live without me. Cry on my shoulder, who don't mind if I cry sometimes too. That's what I like about. Can't live my life without. That's what I like about you.
That's it for this month. See you next time in The Coffee House.
clock.
What is he looking at?
Oh, dude, it's so obvious. Captain Obvious has scored again. Open your window, say something.
Oh, he's really gonna down.
Hi. Hi.
Hey guys.
Hi.